Hi everybody, I just want to say hello. I miss you.
A little bit more because I don't want to
I'm so glad to see y'all. My name is Harmony Hurd. I'm Vice President of the association. I get the honor of serving y'all, and just so glad to be with you all. And I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. So want to give a big thanks to Dr. Margaret Bibb. Dr. Bibb is a clinical psychologist who's been practicing in Huntsville for more than 30 years, having worked in public relations before that. She has been active in many local and national professional and nonprofit organizations, including having been part of the task force that led to the creation of the National Children's Advocacy Center. Dr. Bibb and both of her daughters are also performing artists, and she is very active in the local music and theater communities. She is co-owner with her husband, psychologist Dr. Patrick Quirk of Longwood Psychological Center. You may remember their newspaper column in the Huntsville Times, in which they answered readers' questions about mental health and life issues for more than a decade. And we're so grateful to have her here with us today. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi there. It's nice to be out seeing real faces, isn't it? I had a laugh this morning. I know you all appreciate that. We are some of that subset of the population that continues to work harder than ever, full time. I'm a psychologist. I do therapy primarily, and so I'm talking to people 40 hours a week on this iPad, and have learned every video chat format there is in the last couple of months. Got pretty good at most of them. But this morning I was getting dressed, and I realized, oh, wait, I have to get dressed from the waist down. Where are those work pants again? I literally couldn't find them. And it's like, real shoes? What? So yeah, we've been being like newscasters, looking good from the waist up and the other pants on the bottom. So it is just those little things we're finding going out in public is interesting. And it's real joining for us. How many of you recently have been feeling worried? In general? Distressed? Yeah. Are you having trouble focusing? Yeah, right? Spending way too much time cleaning out that guest room closet or repainting that guest room or thinking you're going to and not ever quite getting to it, like getting into these little obsessive things. Let me take a little side note there. There's been this sort of theme of people humble bragging about all that they're getting done. Oh, I have all this found time. And I even saw a meme a month or so ago that said if you haven't learned a new skill or developed a new hobby by the end of this, you're a slacker or something. And I'm horrified by this. It is a global pandemic. It's a really hard and stressful thing. And so even if you're one of those people whose work went away and suddenly you have a whole lot of time, that doesn't mean that this is a vacation or a sabbatical or that you're supposed to write the great American novel or even repaint your guest room. If you feel like doing that and you get around to it, that's awesome. But you find yourself really missing contact with people. We're all happy to see faces today, and yet you find when you actually do get around them, they irritate you. Because we want it, but we're unused to it, and then when we have it, it's almost normal but not, which is weird and stressful too. And you know, film writers will tell you there's the uncanny zone, I think it's called, where things that are almost normal but not quite are way creepier and scarier than things that are very different from normal. That's why so many people are afraid of clowns. And so this puts us in that uncanny zone where even when we try to return to normal, it is not normal. And that's its own new kind of disturbing. And that's what all of you in your industry and me and mine are looking ahead at. How do we figure that out? You know, you keep hearing this phrase, new normal. Well, yeah, but it isn't normal in any way, really, is it? So there's that. A lot of us are dealing with the dreaded COVID-15 pounds from all the stress baking and the food delivery and all the things. You know, we've all gone quietly gray because our hairdressers aren't around, and so instead of seeing those things as additional stressors, it's really helpful as I watch all your heads nod to realize, yes, we have all experienced at least a lot of these things, and 100 more I didn't want to take the time to list. These are all things that we're experiencing right now in this weird year of not just COVID, but murder hornets and whatever. 2020 is a terrible time, right? But one of the points I wanted to make today is that they're not new. These are also normal, recognizable coping mechanisms that people use for anxiety or stress all the time. It's just that right now our stress level is higher and different. So I want to take a few minutes just talking about anxiety in general. what it is and isn't, and how we can have a relationship with it. It is something that's always been with us, and in some ways is really necessary. You might remember a long time ago there was a commercial campaign for some deodorant or other that said, if you're not a little nervous, then you're not alive. Remember that little jingle? And it's true. If we don't have some level of autonomic nervous system arousal, then we don't function, we don't get anything done. If we don't have some level of concern, fear of new things, then we're going to really be in danger. So it is a necessary and not a bad feeling. It's also, particularly here in the South, you'll hear people use the word anxious to mean looking forward to. I'm anxious to get to that thing next week. And they don't mean they're afraid of it. They mean they're anxious, they're impatient, they want to do it. Anxiety is simply a state of feeling your autonomic nervous system is aroused. And here's the thing, it's exactly the same arousal of your nervous system that you get when you're excited. Heart rate goes up a little bit, breathing gets a little shallow, you feel a little shaky, a little distracted, all the things that happen. And so when you're feeling really nervous, anxious, sometimes you can completely flip that on its head by saying, oh, I'm really excited about this thing. And all of a sudden, all of those feelings, the butterflies in your stomach feel good now instead of that. Same butterflies, coming from the same neurological reason. But because we gave it a different name, it doesn't cripple us and make us feel so bad anymore, right? So it's difficult to apply that to being excited about COVID or being excited about, figuring out how to wear masks and the thing. But in general, with anxiety, when you can do that, what that does is it helps you to recognize that a feeling is just a feeling. No one has ever died of a feeling. A feeling has never completely crushed anyone. It can feel like it will. Sudden fear, grief can feel like it's absolutely going to flatten you. Guilt sometimes, but in truth, all a feeling is a feeling, and it will pass and it won't kill you. And so one of the things we have to do is learn to live with it and work with it. We as humans have a particular kind of anxiety, fear that we carry around though, because early humans and most mammals up until now don't really have anticipatory anxiety. They only have a fear response when there is a present threat. So your dog or cat might respond with a whole lot of anxiety when the July 4th fireworks are going off, or if a strange animal or human comes into their space unexpectedly. They're going to have a big fear response. And they might remember it for a while after. Sometimes they'll dream it. After July 4th, the dog will have some weird dreams for a night or two, but they do not then carry that forward and start anticipating the next fireworks. They do not sit around like we do and dream up all sorts of scenarios of all the possible things that could go wrong and run our blood pressure up. No. They're just going to wait for the next time that there is an actual thing to be afraid of. Human beings, unfortunately, have taken our greater cognitive skill and turned that into, oh, well, we can make up a whole new set of things to be worried about that don't even exist yet. And that leads us to a sense of urgency, like we have to take some kind of action to protect ourselves. And we do have to take some kinds of reasonable actions. We don't want to pretend like nothing ever goes wrong. I hope you have insurance and wear your seatbelts and change out the batteries in your smoke alarms and do those things that are precautions and that are protective. But then once you do that, don't walk around your house sniffing, trying to see if you can smell fire all the time. We have to take precautions and then we have to let it go. We don't need to create trouble. One of the things that happens with people who have anxiety is, again, because of that sense of, oh, I need to do something about this, is there's this reflexive scanning of the horizon. I'm going to find all these potential threats and I'm going to nip them in the bud before they get to me, right? And so that's where we get into that thinking up all the possible things that could go wrong, because, well, if I do that, I'll be able to eliminate the threat and then I'm protected, right? No. Because while we're looking out there on the horizon, for one thing, there's going to be something sneaking up behind us that's going to get us that we didn't anticipate. But more than that, most of those threats on the horizon would have just passed on by. They actually would not have come into our reality. But because we're scanning, looking for them, what we actually are doing is we're plucking it from there and bringing it right here. So we're bringing that fear, that issue, that anxiety into our space. And then, whether the thing happens or not, we've lost. Because it likely wouldn't have even happened, and yet because we behaved as though it were going to, we have a lot of the same effects, a lot of the same damage, stress hormones, the cortisol levels go up, all the things that, happen. I don't want to go into a big talk about the physiological effects of anxiety. Most of you know at least some of them. All of that happens, and the behavioral changes, the same sort of damage happens to our brains and our bodies and our relationships and our lives because of worry as it does if the thing actually happens. So we've actually created, it's one of those ways you've heard the phrase that fear creates the very thing we fear. That's the main way it does it, by having this illusion that we can anticipate all the scary things and somehow control them. That's why it's much better once you've done the preventive things to allow yourself to rest and recoup. That's why your dog or cat then sleeps 20 hours a day waiting for the next fearful thing, conserving resources. That's the other thing that happens. Not only have we, if we anticipate things and try to fix them ahead of time, not only have we brought those feelings in and done that damage, but we have also used up some of our resources. We've used up some of our internal and external resources so that if the thing actually does happen, now we're weakened and less able to deal with it well. So, why do we do it? We do it because we need to have some sense of control. When we're anxious, we feel out of control, we feel vulnerable, and particularly with things that are happening like in this year, it gets to where every day when I open up my news app, I sort of wince and like, well, do I want to know? By the way, I saw a really good phrase about that the other day. They call it doom scrolling. Don't sit and doom scroll. I'll get into that in a minute. Yeah, that's a terrible idea. And so we get this greater and greater need to control something and to feel safe. So one of the first things, the easy things that people will fall into when they're anxious is anger. I said earlier, you get around people and all of a sudden they irritate you, or you run into people with different ideas, different beliefs, different behaviors around all that's going on, and there's these flashes of anger. Well, it's because we need something to control. If we are letting ourselves feel fear, vulnerability, or outside of this current situation, guilt, shame, whatever those sticky, vulnerable feelings are, we feel weak and vulnerable. If I get good and angry, I have put on a suit of armor, picked up my weapons, I'm ready to go to war. Now I don't feel anxious, I feel protected, I feel empowered. I'm gonna get you with this club instead of you're gonna hit me because I'm vulnerable. And that works really well, really short term. That anger is short term, protective, empowering, and therefore it's addictive. We can get stuck in an anger loop because it's a lot more comfortable in the short term to be mad and have our armor on and our weapons out than it is to be sad, scared, vulnerable, and open. And so it's a very easy hole to fall into is the anger. And sometimes it's actual overt anger, sometimes it's that irritation or that distance or that pulling away from people. It's the same root. It's going to the negative. And it is a need to protect ourselves and to feel in control that's driving that. We'll get in a little while into how we can more effectively, proactively be in control. We do need to control things. We just need to be deliberate about the things we are controlling and not go to the dysfunctional ones. We also will sometimes fall into driven or compulsive behaviors. I must sort all the laundry that's been piled up for 6 months and put it all away. I must accomplish so much in my sales this month, whatever the driven behaviors are. And they might be things that are actual legitimate behaviors we need to be doing, but the focus on it, the urgency of it is too much. Or they might be things that don't matter at all, that we just, it gets this greater and greater sense of importance when we're dealing with anxiety, because if I can control this, if I can finish, if I can get the whole garden planted by Sunday night, then I'm in control of something. Look, it looks like I did a thing, and then that's very soothing for us. And again, up to a point, that's a helpful thing to do, but if it becomes compulsive, it's taking away from other important things, then not so good. Lots of other way worse things we do to cope: overeating, drinking, drug use, all those things. Clearly those are not going to help anything. Sometimes just withdrawing and shutting down is another thing that happens, where again, that's that thing where we want contact, but then again, contact is hard, and so we'll just kind of freeze. The whole deer in headlights analogy you've heard, and anxiety often does that, where we don't really know what to do, we can't really control anything, and so the one kind of control we can have is just don't do anything. You've all been around a toddler who, when they feel really out of control, they know one word and it's no, right? And they're not they're not being rebellious, they are being disrespectful, but they're not intending to be disrespectful. What they're trying to do is get some control because they feel out of control. And we do that in a little bit more adult version. So, instead of trying to do things that numb or medicate those feelings or focus them in the wrong direction, we have to come back to what I said earlier, which is don't be afraid of feelings. And that's a funny thing because when we are afraid of events, the feelings are what we're afraid of. We aren't really afraid of a thing happening, even down to someone we love dying. It's not really their death we're afraid of. It's how we're going to feel when they die, right? We're not afraid exactly of, being fired from a job. We're afraid of how it's going to feel when we get fired and when we're now unemployed. It's the feeling that is really the thing we're scared of. So when we can learn to sit in and manage and not be afraid of our feelings, then all of a sudden real events that are scary are a tenth as scary, because 9/10 of what you were scared of was how it's going to feel. Only a tenth of it was the thing itself, the large majority of the time. So I want to go real briefly through a little exercise with you that if we have time at the end, I'll actually walk you through doing it. The most effective 5-minute anxiety reduction technique that I know of, and I call it the worst case scenario technique, because when we try to comfort ourselves, let's say you're afraid you're going to get fired, just something's up at work and you've been called into your boss's office, okay? A non-anxious person would think, oh, okay, yeah, I did do, I violated procedure, I made a mistake, whatever. I'm probably going to get a counseling and a ding on my record, and I'm going to have to do some things to fix it. It would be a realistic response, a sense of discomfort and maybe a little dread going into the boss's office. But an anxious person will always go to the worst case scenario. Oh, I'm going to be fired. It's going to be for cause. I'm not even going to be able to get unemployment. Nobody else is going to hire me because this person's going to blackball me forever. And by next Christmas, I'm going to be living in a box under the bridge. Like, we carry it to the nth degree. Or if our spouse is late coming home from work, we don't think the probable answer of, oh, they forgot to tell me they had a meeting, or they decided to stop at the store on the way home. The anxious brain goes to, they're bleeding on the side of the road, and if I don't get there right away, they're going to die, right? And so people will tell you when they're trying to comfort you from anxiety, oh, well, that's not going to happen. You know that. Let's worry about something more realistic. They're not bleeding on the side of the road. They just forgot to tell you they had a meeting, which is likely true. Your anxious brain isn't going to hear that. It doesn't care. We'll say, yeah, I know about it. It could be this other thing, but it could be, right? And so what you got to do is go ahead and go there. Rather than trying to tell your anxious brain, just don't worry. That never works. Has anybody, by the way, ever calmed down in response to being told to calm down? And that's what you're doing to yourself. You're going to calm down. It doesn't work when you tell yourself that either. So what you do instead is you go ahead and go to that worst case scenario, but you do it in a particular way. Anybody who's ever played any kind of sports, dance, any kind of physical thing, you've had a coach or a teacher somewhere have you do a mental rehearsal before you ever moved a muscle. If you're learning a tennis serve, you are feeling that whole motion, that whole serve in your body, seeing it happen before you actually step out on the court and pick up a racket. And so this process is like that. It is mental rehearsal. And what you're proving to yourself is that the feelings won't kill you, like I said a while ago. So in that situation, let's say you're going to get fired, or you think you're going to get fired. So you go ahead and go to that worst case scenario, but you imagine you get that phone call. You got to come to my office at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And then you let yourself feel that feeling. Sit in it a minute. Recognize it's unpleasant, but it won't kill me. And you think about, okay, how's that going to feel? And then what am I going to do? And you imagine yourself doing that. Well, I'm going to call my coworker and get the notes on what the boss said to them yesterday. I'm going to talk to my husband, or whatever the things you're going to do. And then you think, okay, how is that going to feel? You got to take a moment, really imagine it, let yourself sit in that feeling. Okay, then what am I going to do? Take that next action. And that step, how's it going to feel? What am I going to do next? How's that going to feel? What am I going to do next? Play that out all the way, and in that worst case scenario, all the way to I'm living under the bridge and waiting for the food truck, the food pantry folks to come. Because even then, what you discover is even at the end of that, oh, well, I am still alive. I'm not injured or sick. I'm not going to die. I'll probably find my way to the mission or the Salvation Army or someplace where, and then they'll get me a job, and then, you know, I'm going to find my way back. I was not completely devastated, without hope or help or all the things that it feels like at the beginning. So you've proven to yourself two things. I'm not alone in free fall. I actually have both internal and external resources that I can draw on along the way. That's that what am I going to do next thing. And I survived the feelings. That's the let me myself feel it a minute. So you've proven to yourself the feelings aren't going to kill me. And even if I'm right and this worst case scenario thing happens, I still had internal and external resources and tools to use. And at the end of the day, it was not scorched earth devastation. How about that? And this actually even works if the scenario is that you die in the end. By the way, it works in any scenario. Then you do the second part. This sounds really long, but we think really quickly. This whole thing takes about 2 minutes, 30 maybe. So you come back after the whole worst case scenario, and you do it again, but with a more likely. Because now that you've sort of teased out your feelings and thoughts about the worst case scenario, you've cleared enough space in your head that you can imagine, okay, yeah, it probably is more likely that I'm just going to get a write-up and a whatever. And so, but then you imagine that again too. What's that going to feel like? What am I going to do next? What's that going to feel like? Play it all the way out. And again, you have proven to yourself in a real experiential way, oh, okay, that didn't feel good, but it didn't crush me. And I did have tools and resources, internal and external. I wasn't alone. And hey, at the end of it, okay, still have my job, and maybe I learned some things, and I'll be a better employee for it. And again, nothing's happened. You're still sitting in your chair. It's 5 minutes after you got the notice that you got to go see the boss tomorrow, but you feel 100 times better because you took this couple minutes to just let yourself feel it and think it through. Again, if we have time at the end, I'll walk you through a more specific example. I want you to, if you go away with nothing else today, I'd love for you to take home that exercise to really manage fear. It's so helpful. But I want to talk some more again about specific to our current situation with not just COVID, but you know all of 2020, but primarily the COVID, because that is the thing that's affecting all of us right now, and looking ahead at trying to figure out how to keep our businesses and offices afloat and functioning. And that's part of the problem. This is a new and quickly changing scenario. We don't have templates for it. It leads to a whole lot of that scanning behavior I talked about, the anxiety, where we're just scanning all the time. What's going to happen next? Well, what's going to happen next? When? How can I protect myself from it? And again, that's going to make us more anxious and weaker and less able to deal with it when it gets there. And creates a whole bucket of stressful issues that we might not have even had to deal with if we hadn't, indulged in that kind of anxiety. We also, in addition to just the fear right now and the confusion, the oddness of it all, there's two other related emotions that we have to address, and that is grief and trauma. Grief is one of those emotions I mentioned earlier that can absolutely feel like it's going to flatten you. And right now, there's been so many large and small losses. Right at the beginning, I remember just feeling such pain for the high school and college seniors who had their senior years ripped away from them. Their spring musical closed the day before it was going to open that they'd worked on for 5 months, and their proms and their graduations and all of their things, their senior spring break trips. And I had some friends who said, well, it's teenage stuff, it's all fine. What about this person who lost their business or whatever? Well, you know what? When you're 17, 18 years old, that is huge, huge loss. It might not seem big to me, but I know it's big for them. And so people who, had to reschedule weddings and all the things. Worse than that, people, sending their relatives off to die alone, unattended at a deathbed where you can't go. And then you can't even gather for a funeral to mourn them. I've had 3 friends during this, lose a family member that way. It's been very, very hard to sit with them while they knew their loved one was dying and they could not be with them, let me tell you. And so grief, whether it's over something huge like that, or, oh wow, we saved for our Disney trip for 3 years and now we had to cancel it, that is still a big loss. And when we have 1,000 little losses coming at us all the time, and just the loss of normalcy, the loss of the things we always do at this time of year, it piles on, and it creates this fairly heavy wave of grief. And grief makes us do interesting things. It makes us withdraw. It leads to some of that irritability I talked about when we're around people. It can lead us to eat too much, drink too much, all those other things, we do with anxiety, self-comforting things. Grief is also, though, a great leveler. It's one emotion and process that all of us have or will go through a number of times in our lives, and it's very similar each time you do. So one of the things I invite people to do about that one is recognize that everyone on the planet right now is experiencing some level of grief and loss daily, and to feel that as a connector, that we all are in that same boat together, and much as if you were in a large extended family that lost a family member, and everybody in the family knows we're all grieving, and so you reach out to each other a little more, and you're a little kinder when you're around each other, and you give each other a little more grace for the annoying behaviors. Hopefully we're doing that on a larger scale right now, because we are all in that grief place, which then leads to trauma. Trauma is a word that gets tossed around a lot and overused, but this is exactly relevant to what's happening right now. Trauma, by definition, is that effect of unusual or unexpected, out of the norm events, out of control events happening to us. Well, hello. And so what happens when, and it's huge trauma, and it's also those daily micro traumas, so it's a whole lot. And that leads to actual physical changes. That leads to hormonal changes, elevated cortisol levels, lots of changes in our nervous and cardiovascular systems. Over time, it actually rewires the prefrontal cortex in your brain, which is why people who have extended periods of trauma in childhood or wartime or whatever don't ever completely fully recover, because your brain is now rewired. So one of the things that the whole therapy community right now is sort of begging people to do is, please try to mitigate the amount of PTSD we're all trying to help you recover from in a year or two. Because we are individually and collectively experiencing trauma, and we're going to come out of this with a whopping load of PTSD and all of the things that entails. And of course, PTSD has us be reactive to triggers and less able to manage stress, and also create physical illness and mental illness and whatnot. And so things that will nurture and comfort you physically and emotionally right now, things that will address some of the out of control anxiety stuff, is also minimizing the amount of trauma that we're doing to our brains and nervous systems, and all of us will recover faster when we do that. This kind of trauma, the whole collective, cumulative part of it, it's helpful, I think, to give an example to compare the Vietnam War from all the wars that came before it, and most of them since then, was different. And about a 3 times higher level of PTSD, people coming back. Well, that does not mean that anybody went through anything worse, particularly in Vietnam, than people have been through in every war that's ever happened. There's never been a war that wasn't horrible. And people in World War II went through horrific things. However, the average age of a soldier in World War II was 28. And almost all of them had experiences where they were at the battlefront and then they were not. They knew where the front was, they knew where the danger was for the most part, and then they could get away. When the system couldn't take it anymore, then they would get furlough or leave, or they could be in Paris watching the dancing girls and in not very much danger, or not like they were at the front. In Vietnam, the average age of a soldier was 19, so they were babies. They were emotionally unprepared to be there. And the danger was vague, diffuse, hard to see. There was no front line and no safe place. There was no clarity where the enemy was, where the threat was. It might be that kid over there. It might. And so there's no opportunity to escape and regroup and heal. And that kind of trauma goes so much deeper. You can have a child who is, has a horrible event, is kidnapped, is in a fire, but it has some horrible traumatic event. But if the rest of their life is safe and normal, they will recover ridiculously well from that. Children are adaptive and very elastic, plastic in their brains, and a horrible thing can happen to a child and they can recover so much more and so much better than that same thing happening to an adult, in truth, if it's a thing or a few things. But if they live in an unsafe environment where it's never quite safe and they don't know where the danger is and where the safety is, there is horrific damage. Again, even the brain is rewired and changed. You can map it on a PET scan of the brain. You can actually map the trauma effects that are permanent. And so this situation we're in now is one of those dangerous childhood Vietnam kind of traumas. It's not the, oh, okay, we're safe here and there's danger over there and we know all the things to do to try to mitigate it. It's that waking up every morning afraid to open your news app because what is it today and which new threat. And interestingly, specific to the COVID, the threat is only from other humans. It's not dangerous to walk outside your door. This isn't West Nile where you have to be afraid of the mosquitoes. This isn't a wartime situation where somebody's going to be out there with a gun. There's no threat in the environment. There's threat in every human being that walks up to you. And so that creates a very odd kind of under the surface feeling of, when and where am I safe? And so it does create that collective trauma experience. So what do we do about that? What do we need? We need a lot of things. We need information. We need to make sure that we are really paying attention to what is going on and not what we think is going on or what somebody said was going on, or to understand as best we can expert guidelines, recommendations, information on all the things happening. Trying to address that unpredictable part of it, where it makes us so scared. Let me take a moment on the information though. I said something earlier about the doom scrolling. Please detox from the news. Turn your televisions off. Well, I've been screaming at people to turn their televisions off for 30 years. I hate television. But if you're like me and you get your news from news apps, give yourself 15 to 30 minutes in the morning and in the evening to check. And check thoroughly. Make sure, go to all your most trusted news sources, people, whatever. Get the information you need, what's happening, what do I need to know, and then put it away. Don't turn off all your breaking news alerts, don't have the TV on, focus on life-affirming, happier, nurturing things. And then sometime in that evening, check in again, see what's happening. I promise you, nothing is going to happen in those few hours between your two check-ins that you need to know about or need to do anything about right now. It is not necessary to keep staying up to date. And what that does, each of those little breaking news things and all, or just the news on in the background or all the conversations constantly happening around it, it's causing those little micro traumas in it. It's weakening us and making the whole situation worse. So be aware, be informed, but in brief little moments, brief little assigned times, morning and evening, and then in between, we need to focus on, look, we're having lunch together, and isn't this marvelous? And it's been the most beautiful spring I can remember in 30 years here, and I hope all of you have been outside a lot during that. So information, but carefully control the flood of it coming at you. Don't drink from the fire hose all day on that. We need plans, contingency plans. I've talked with several of you in here today about trying to figure out how to get back open or stay open or keep our industries afloat. I spent a bunch of hours this past weekend writing policy and procedure to try to get my office back open, although we really can't yet. CDC guidelines are still not to do it, so we're not yet, but that will come. And so trying to write those policies about something that I know is going to be different by the time we actually implement those policies is really hard, but it was helpful to at least have a draft. We got to have plans in place, even though we know those plans right now are going to have to flex and change. If you don't have a plan in place at all, you're probably feeling a lot worse, right? So we do need those kind of things. We also need breaks. I talked about taking breaks from the news. We also need breaks from the work of it. Life is confusing and odd right now, but I hope you're also taking time to take a little day trip safely, to safely get with your friends. Even in wartime, we dance. We need to have happiness. We need to remember what the purpose of it all is. Why are we fighting so hard? Well, so that we can join together and celebrate. And so we need to be celebrating. We need to be, plant a garden, do some things that are life affirming, and we really lean into that. Take breaks from the seriousness of it. We need things we can control. We talked earlier about how we fall into all of these dysfunctional behaviors trying to get some control. Well, okay, the cure for that is find functional things that give us control. Again, grow a garden, fold some laundry. You know, little things like that. Just making a little order out of chaos. Repaint that guest room if you want to. Finally tell off your neighbor you've been mad at for a year about his barking dog, you know, taking care of some issue that's bothering you. Get on a schedule and stick to it. Work out more, do some yoga, take some online piano classes. Like, there's loads of things you can do. All of those are good for us in lots of ways, but specific to right now, I listed them because that gives us control. That is a thing we can do. We know when it is, we know how it's going to be, we have some control over how we do it, and that is amazingly soothing when we're dealing with uncertainty and anxiety and all the change. So find things that are good that you can control and lean into them. Not other people. We tend to try to control other people at times like this, and not that one. But we do need people. We need social interaction. We are a species that is just, we're pack animals. We are not designed to be alone. And I know a lot of you have been feeling that in this quarantine. You know, some of us, I'm a raging introvert, and both my career and all of my side gigs all involve intense contact with people all the time. It's kind of odd. And so for me, having to work at home, sweet. I've been training for this my whole life. Like, I'll do this forever. However, even those of us who are fine being at home, not around people, are beginning to miss it because, again, even introverts need connection with other people, real connection. The Zoom is great, but real connection is better. And of course, your extrovert friends are hurting. They are so hungry for real social contact. I'm sure y'all have, some of you may be in that boat. I've had that experience of running into some of my extrovert friends, and they're just coming closer and closer at me, and I'm backing away. You can see that hunger for contact, and so we have it at different levels, but we all have it. And so I love, I know that just a couple of days ago, I think y'all were still trying to decide if you were going to do this live or virtual, and I was so pleased when the decision was live, because it is better. It is, we need to know that there are other people out there and that we're doing things in groups. And we need to tell our stories. You know how when there's a tornado, for about 2 weeks after that, everybody you run into is talking about it? Yeah, I heard it, I did this, I heard my neighbor did that. Everybody gets on Facebook now and talks about it. Anytime there's a big event, people want to talk about it. We need to share our stories, and that's a good and healthy thing. We've been doing it since caveman days. They would come in from the hunt, and then they would draw those cave drawings and do these little theatrical performances and process the hunt and talk about it and share the story. So that's been a part of us since our beginning, and we need to do that now. It does several things. We get validation. Oh, you're feeling that too? Wow, that helps me feel better. It's not just me. We get perspective when we hear, oh, wow, you're stuck at home with 2 toddlers, and I'm not, oh, wow, bless you. Or 3 teenagers who are mad about quarantine. Oh, so or one woman I know who is a single mom who is home with a college student who's really mad about having to come home, a high school student who's really mad about being stuck at home, and a 3-year-old. So this woman has my sympathy, right? And so that kind of perspective, or if their experience is just different from our own. So it is helpful in a lot of ways. It also gives us meaning. This is a historic event, unlike anything any of us have experienced, and hopefully won't again in our lifetimes. We'll see. But regardless, all of us will be talking about 2020 for the rest of our lives. We'll be looking back, and I was saying something at the table earlier. My personal belief is that we'll be looking back and seeing it as a good thing. I have seen since the day one of the COVID thing anyway, I've seen good, a little good happening all along the way, and some greater good, and I have no doubt that down the road we are all going to look back and see a lot of good change that got started because of this very, very difficult year. But even if you can't see that yet or feel that yet, it's okay, because it is a huge, important event, and we need to lean in and not miss it. It's so easy when things are stressful to just go home and turn on the Netflix and pretend like everything's okay. And again, some of the day we need to do that. But also, pay attention. Learn from it. If you're a journaler, journal this thing. Really get your thoughts and feelings and tell your stories on paper. Not just to record it, but we do a lot of processing and understanding our feelings as we're writing them down, right? And so if we can, most people, when I say I think there's good going to come out of this, nod and go, yeah, I think you're right. But I don't know how many people are finding ways to let ourselves actually feel that good while we're in it. And so try to do that instead of just holding on for, yeah, in 5 years we're going to look back and be glad this happened. If we can kind of feel the good things happening now. Somebody at my table mentioned that people are smiling a little more and a little more helpful when you see them out in public, and for the most part, and that sort of thing, and that's wonderful. People are reaching out electronically, so many things. You know, we learned in about a week that teleworking works for a whole lot more people than anybody wanted to admit before, and I hope that's going to keep on. We learned in about 2 weeks that, the people we thought were essential were not, and the people we didn't respect are essential. Like, lots of wonderful, wonderful lessons that we're learning. So the more you can lean into, let me experience the good of this while we're in it, is really going to help it not seem so scary and painful. Okay, I want to stop there and kind of open up the floor for questions. Several people said they had particular things they wanted to address, so go. Did I address them all? No.
I was wondering if it's fresh air and just getting out or planning something to look forward to.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned that at the beginning. Yes, in any times. It's hard to accomplish it, but if we could accomplish 30 minutes a day of natural light and 30 minutes a day of exercise, preferably at the same time, a good old walk outside, that does about the equivalent good for us as a standard dose of an antidepressant. Most people wouldn't even need the antidepressant if they could accomplish 30 minutes of sunlight, 30 minutes of exercise a day. And even those people who need them, they're going to work a whole lot better. So that is always a good idea. Since this thing started, double up on it. I've been on every trail in the woods in Madison County since this thing started. And then when those started to get too crowded, I've been walking around Big Spring almost every day, because we have to get out and get sunshine and exercise and see people, see normalcy, all of that is extremely helpful. All the time, but especially right now, yes. There's immune benefits, there's emotional benefits, all kinds of things. So yes, even though our long, beautiful spring is over and we're headed into muggy Alabama summer, go outside anyway, it's good for you.
I was curious, in the workplace, if we recognize, or maybe how do we recognize somebody who's maybe going through or experiencing extreme anxiety, and then if we do recognize it, how do we help them? You know, we can't just say, oh, it's going to be okay. You know, how?
Because you don't know that.
Yeah. How do we reach out to them to help them to, you know, to get through it and maybe be okay?
Good question. I don't know if you could hear her. What she said is, if we recognize someone maybe in the workplace who's having undue anxiety, how do we reach out to them and help? And just telling them, oh, it's going to be okay, doesn't work. Like I said earlier, nobody ever calms down by being told to calm down. So what you do instead is validate, get them to talk about it. You know, it seems like you're really having a lot of anxiety. You want to tell me about it. Sometimes just saying it out loud gets it down to a manageable size. And validating it, yeah, I felt a lot of those same things too. Or you know, I have a friend who's really struggled with that same thing. That validation, that connection of I'm not alone in that feeling. And then, you know, give them something they can control. If it's a coworker, you know, and they're just really struggling, and they don't know what they're going to do about whether their kids are going to go back to school this fall, or what, all those uncertain things, and so, yep, that's really hard, and I hate it for you, and let them talk it out, and then say, you know, I could really use some help on this thing over here that is hands-on, you can control it. So help them find one of those things might help.
To kind of dovetail from that question, one of the things you've mentioned repeatedly is sharing, you know, and really validating and having those conversations, because everyone's experience is different. How do you suggest we not only participate in encouraging and uplifting people, but also guarding our hearts so that we are not bogged down with extra, you know, feelings? Right.
That's a good one. You know, again, because we spend about 30, 40 hours a week listening to people's difficulty with that. I forget, because we've got really well developed muscles for bouncing that stuff off. But when you don't have that, sometimes it is okay just to say, you know, can we talk about this maybe tomorrow? Let's have a phone call, or let's, you know, get together and have a cup of coffee and talk it out. I'm just really not up to it today. It is absolutely okay to say I'm having a rough day myself and I can't really go there with you today. Sometimes if you've got somebody who, they've gone past just venting or just kind of sharing to get validation, and now they're just, you know, stuck rambling. It is absolutely appropriate and even a kindness sometimes to go, you know, if there's really nothing else you need to say about that, why don't we talk about something happier? Just overtly change the subject can help too. Because it's not good for anybody to just stay stuck in the negativity. Just like we don't need to be listening or watching the news all day, we also don't need our friends, neighbors, coworkers, you know, putting negative in us all day. Yeah. So give yourself permission in a kind way, just to say, you know, we'd probably both feel better if we talked about something happier, something like that. Okay. Yes.
What would you say to a group where the entire 100% of the group is in a state of anxiety? Where there's not a single person who can remove himself yet from that situation?
Well, what I say to that group, you know, same thing. If it were me or you or someone outside of that group talking to them, then, you know, you try to work to get them to share whatever their collective anxiety is. Are they all anxious about the same thing, or they're just a group of people who happen to be anxious? Like, if it's all about the same thing, then give them something they can put their hands on. You know, let's form a committee. Let's write some policy for this. You know, give me your thoughts about what we can do to address it. So they've got something concrete they can do instead of just, oh no, it's bad, right? Best thing I can think of. I don't know if you want to give them some more specifics about the
No,
example.
you just validated me giving some focus to a group is the right thing.
Right. Just, you know, give them something that that you're pretty sure they can do and can control, and you'll see them calm right down. All right. Thank you so much for having me. Wish you all so much luck in keeping your various businesses afloat and whatnot. And you know, it is a confusing landscape ahead, but we are, also remember, this is going to end. We are going to be set free. Probably not till next spring, but we are going to be set free. And we got to keep reminding each other of that too. So hang in there.